one of the frustrating things I see in the industry is there is a self-reinforcing security blanket of a narrative that I think at its extreme becomes self-righteous.
You've got these AAA studios that are now going, shoot, a game now costs me minimum 100 million to make like a good AAA product or something like that. 200 million maybe 300 million. And I have to make that back. This is a different world than when 40 million was a AAA game.
Right now, I'll be honest, I see an industry that is more immature than a lot of other industries who are working in less innovative spaces than we are.
The cost of making a AAA game just keeps going up. Like the idea of having a 400 person dev team 20 years ago, are you kidding me?
Well, by the way, there's I agree. And there's an insecurity in that too. Which is like, absolutely. I think that there's one of the frustrating things I see in the industry is there is a self-reinforcing security blanket of a narrative that I think at its extreme becomes self-righteous, which is like, we have to be innovating in these ways all the time. Like what we were joking about water reflections earlier. That's one of those areas where it's like, I will see AAA games ship in the most busted form. Like the standard now for like basic functionality is insane. The standard for like reasonable amount of hard drive space taken is insane. The standard for like sitting there waiting for shaders to load for 8.5 minutes before you can get into the game is insane. Like the amount of stress we're putting on players and like the amount of stress we're putting on engagement to just achieve that, like that technology increase and that aesthetic increase is like, again, they're like those game developers, or I should say, we are so convinced that that is necessary, that we have to do that. You can't not do that. That I think is directly hand in hand with the price of development going up through the roof.
Yeah, on this topic of just increasing price point, one of the things that I remember is back when like Star Wars: The Old Republic came out, I think it was 300 million or something like that. And that was considered insane at the time. You know, and Star Wars: The Old Republic isn't actually that old, right? But it was like this nuts amount of money that someone was spending on one game. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I saw or heard recently that it's possible GTA 6 has like a $2 billion budget. The cost of AAA is going up like crazy. Whether 2 billion is right or not, the reality is that 300 million is no longer this insane outlier. It's something that like, yeah, that's what it takes. You got to make a great game. It's going to cost some money. And the time invested, the number of people invested, all these things. And I think you were calling out this sort of trap almost that I see AAA falling into, where the base expectation of what good is, some of that I think self-inflicted, but a lot of that player expectation around like, well, you're a AAA studio, so you can't produce something that, looks like BattleBit or only has like a Rust, right? You can't produce a Rust style game. And you look at Rust and it's like this highly successful, highly profitable game. Or again, PUBG, to come back to that, highly successful, highly profitable game. But like, well, we could never produce something like that. I mean, look at how miserable so many aspects of it are. And so there's this thing of like the barrier to AAA from a cost perspective is just going up and up and up and up, and you're having to hire bigger and bigger dev teams. And
by the way, you're having to hire more expensive devs as well, because as you like hit that upper bound of like innovation when it comes to the tech and the art and the sort of the aesthetic, for lack of a better term, like you need the cream of the crop to be able to do that, or at least that's the assumption too. So it's like your per head costs go through the roof as well. So you have a small cadre of developers that are incredibly high demand.
Yep.
And then sadly, this is also, I think, related to the staffing challenge in our industry. I think a more innovative, open, prototypey, iterative approach to game development fares in most people's minds more with the idea of having like more junior or less experienced developers working closely together and collaborating. Whereas when you have the $500 million game that has to hit those incredibly high standards in each key discipline area. It's like you max out your talent level in each discipline vertical, and you really have them lean in and focus on just like squeezing every little bit of like aesthetic out of that area that they're experts in.
You're trying to get to the person who's already done that or something very close to it, right? Oh, have you not worked on this particular type of game with this particular, like, have you done third person RPG style, sword based combat? And if you have, you've done that, but you've only done it with guns. Okay, well, we want the person who's done it with swords, because that's totally, it's like we're narrowing in, and we're undervaluing learning.
It sounds like we're even squeezing the innovation out at that level. It's like we want to know that you're the person who did a thing exactly like what we're doing, and we want to know that you are one of the best people at it. And then those are the criteria by which we hire you. And I think the way that appears to a lot of junior developers is like that if I don't have 10 years of AAA experience, that I'm not hireable. And I think that it's more nuanced than that. But again, it's back to your point about like everything on rails. We want everything on rails. Yes. And
I'm not interested in your ability to learn, grow, figure it out, develop. I want you to come in
and do what you're good at
out of the box, and you just know how to do it.
Yeah.
And by the way, then you look at like remote to back to in office and some of the consequences there, as people were like, oh, we're going to go. But you still, like, I know those studios are still hiring top level experts that are considered best in the world in their craft, remote or not, right? Mm-hmm. They're doing that all over the place because they did it before. They did it before COVID. And that's because like I want that skill set so badly, but I'm not necessarily interested in developing it. I want it out of the box. And so that drives prices up because the demand for those people goes very, very high. And you end up with sort of this unbalancing of the ecosystem when it comes to skill and hireability and all these different things. And on top of that, you've got these AAA studios that are now going, shoot, a game now costs me minimum 100 million to make like a good AAA product or something like that. 200 million, maybe 300 million. And I have to make that back. This is a different world than when 40 million was a AAA game or 30 million was true. Now that's what you give to a startup. You give that like a well-funded startup gets that much money to like try something out. And again, even if they get too much, like I said, have to succeed beyond their wildest dreams, have to be one of the best games of the year or something like that to really have this play out.
Well, and I think the dovetail there is, like we said, this trend of I view that as a pressure cooker. That for AAA studios, that picture you painted is like a pressure cooker, and the only outcome I see of that long term is that it explodes, because I just don't see how. Like the obvious trend is that eventually those big games are going to stop making as much money as they cost. Like to me, if you're looking at a studio like Ubisoft and you're like the margins are just getting thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner, to me what that implies, that trend implies, is that eventually they're going to launch a new Assassin's Creed game. They're going to lose a ton of money. We don't know when it's going to happen, but they're going to lose a ton of money, and then they're going to be in a real bad place.
Yeah. By the way, you're seeing this in movies. I think it's a great analogy. Like some of the movies that are coming out that are costing hundreds of millions, 200, 300 million to make. But they always worked. Right? The Marvel movies, they always worked. And suddenly they're not working, right? Like suddenly the audience has capped, or the quality is different, or like something's going on where, wait a minute, I can't produce a new Marvel's movie and immediately be on the top 100 best grossing movies of all time in like the $1 billion range, right? Suddenly I might not make back what I put into this with advertising. Whoa. And I completely agree with you. I think AAA is heading to, or has already hit that point where they're going, whoa, hang on.
Yep.
The risk here suddenly isn't giving me the reward.
To your
the risk
point,
here isn't working.
And back to that dovetail, to your point, the lethal companies, the PUBGs, the Stardew Valleys of the world, that's becoming easier. There's only going to be more of those as time goes on.
Yep.
And that transitions us to what the new world order possibly looks like.
Yeah. And I think it is like Roblox, I think is a great example of a growing game company. Yep, it's got controversy. I'm not going to worry about any of that for now. It's just you go, you make games, and you play the games you think are fun if you're on the system. And I remember going to a friend's house, and his kids had Roblox up, and they were just like, yeah, we don't really buy multiple games, was what the kind of vibe was. It was like, we just find the game in Roblox that we want to play.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because somebody's built it, right? A Call of Duty? Oh, I've got a Call of Duty style, like feels the same as Call of Duty, but it's just in Roblox. And it's like the graphics, are more like BattleBit remastered or something like that. But who cares? It's still a fun experience, right? I'm still running around in a giant world fighting it out. And I can do that with just about anything. And Fortnite's move into this with the UEFN. Like there's so much going on around creation of new games. And to be fair, a higher percentage of them are failing. But to your point earlier, they also cost so much less. That like if I pay $100 to put a game on Steam and it fails, I'm out $100 and some of my time on the weekends. But in like a few weekends of doing this, I got further than I would have been able to get 20 years ago in like a year because of the advancement in tools and technology to help me build. And this is what the AAA studios are starting to run up against in a world where there's limited players, it's still expanding, but ultimately limited players and limited attention spans. And we operate in something like a winner takes all. And admittedly, there can be a lot of winners.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it takes me to a place where I keep thinking about leadership as a concept and what that means in this context. Mm-hmm. And we've covered a lot of areas that I think have touch points to leadership. But like one thing that comes into my mind is like, are leaders actually taking a step back to ask themselves, like, what's really happening and where should we be going? And what does innovation actually look like? And back to the defined versus empirical spectrum, like where should we be?
Yeah.
Because, when we talk about our friend who will not be named and this idea of shots on goal, it's like one thing I appreciated about that conversation for that game studio was how deliberate they were about that, how they had really sat down and thought through, hey, we don't want to get sucked into all the traditional narratives. We don't want to get sucked into the sort of way you're supposed to do this. And, I think it's very natural for people, the herd, to just go in the same way, the way that they think they're supposed to, the way that things have been done in the past. But I think what we're calling out is like for leaders, there's really like, this is a little bit of an alarm bell. This is a little bit of a call to action to change the way you think, because there's a good chance you might get the rug pulled out from under you if you don't get ahead of this a little bit. Because I really do believe the industry is going to look completely different 10 years from now than it does today. And I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but like, there's this question of like, can we afford to not be proactive about that? One thing, by the way, Ben, I've been surprised about when it comes to this trend is like, okay, cool. So I can have like an intellectual debate with some manager about whether they should be pushing around Jira tickets all day instead of like pushing their team to innovate and really like leading them to iterate. Mm-hmm. I can have a debate about sort of what the appropriate sort of personnel management methods are, whether it's something more traditional with like more accountability and like, you do this and I tell you what to do and there's a hierarchy here. But like once we put this trend line in place that we've been talking about and like the way things look like they're changing, it adds a new dimension to that conversation where I'm almost like, now I start looking at these draconian managers who are just taskmasters basically. And I say, okay, this is no longer like a philosophical difference between you and I. Because if you buy into the fact that the industry is moving more towards more PUBGs and more Stardew Valleys, like if you believe that that's the direction we're going, you have to ask yourself, where is the thing that I'm doing valuable? And I'm like, the thing that you're doing is valuable working on EA Sports or working on a Ubisoft game. It's not valuable working on a PUBG. And so now that's where all of a sudden now the conversation changes, right? Where I'm like, are all of us collectively as leaders actually moving in the right direction right now? Because we just pointed out how weirdly it seems like it's almost snapped back into authoritarianism a little bit. more defined,
Right.
more task mastery. And I'm like, so we're going we as leaders right now are like taking steps backward toward the objective we need to be moving towards. And that scares me. That scares me a lot, actually.
Well, so, okay, OOC, I think this is actually very related to the thing that was in my head, which is like, you end up in this world where you got so good at doing something that wasn't new game development. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently, right? If you're Riot and you've turned Dota into a more accessible MOBA worldwide, the idea that like you should focus all your time on new game dev is ludicrous. You should attempt to bring League to as many people as you can because players love it. It's high value for them. The game is growing. Everything is growing. You can scale it up. You can scale the company up. And what you become is one of the best live service producers in the world. But there's this thing about that, which is being somebody who can create a great live service experience is different than being somebody who can create a great new game. And similarly, if you're amazing in the EA Sports space at creating a sequel and really figuring out what players loved and didn't love about the last one and making some small pivots to it and, like landing the next best one and getting great ratings from players and having everyone love it. If you're really good at that, there's this thing that we tend to go that like, well, those big companies, they're the best at making games. And I go, no, they're the best at remaking games. They're the best at supporting the live service that supports their game. But actually, they're not the best, and they aren't hiring to be the best, and they aren't working out the skills to be the best at actually making new games. And I think that's one of the reasons why so often R&D in some of those places is so difficult, even though they would claim, and we would all sort of have said like, well, they're the best game makers in the world. Why is it so hard for them? You say, well, yeah, costs have gone up and it's really hard and all this different, but it's actually like, no, the systems you've built, the leaders you've hired, the way you work, everything about how you're oriented is not oriented towards the creation of brand new game experiences. And that's the opposite in the UGC and mod world, where that's all they're trying to do. They're like, oh, I think this might be a cool idea. Well, let me try it. It's easier than ever to do so. But if I'm a big company, like I don't doubt that there were companies that had R&D teams working on products that ended up being very like something that was wildly successful. And they didn't release it because they were like, I don't know if this could work. It's not worth the risk. Because their model is based around sustaining or remaking games, not development of new things. And those are different skill sets. And I guess that's what I'm calling out. So all the people that we think of, and I've historically thought of my whole life as like, well, these are the best game developers in the world, the AAA studios, the Bungies and the Blizzards and all that. They're caught when they try to do something new in all of the pre-existing systems they have that pull them towards what they're good at, which ironically isn't game development, it's game sustainment or, again, game like making sequels, whatever it is. And there's nothing bad about that. It's just this reality. And so all these, like you said, all the places where there's the most money, ironically, aren't set up to do innovation. And part of that is the systems that they have internally. And part of that is that person who's like, well, wait a minute, I want to see the roadmap. Well, wait a minute, I want to see the plan. Well, wait, maybe we can't do that yet. Maybe there's too many unknowns and too much uncertainty, or the plan is really vague in order for it to be accurate. Like we don't know if this is even going to work. And sort of like, well, that's unacceptable, right? It comes back to some of those like coaching calls I had with people, and one was an investor, and they were trying to figure out, how much money does it take to make a successful MMO FPS game? And the question seems reasonable when you think about game development like factory work, where if I have enough of the right discipline for enough of the right years, then eventually something good will come out the other side. But that's not how creative work goes. And almost to try to educate that person in the moment on like, hey, you can't ask me like how many QA will you need in production? You can't ask me like how many animators am I going to need during the ideation phase for my MMO FPS? I don't know. What are you trying to do? What's the specifics around the game? There's so many questions. How long is it going to take? And what you're trying to do there is put a dollar value.
When I hear you saying all that,
and I'm saying you can't. We want to take a quick break from the podcast. There's no shortage of challenges in game development, and leaders are often attempting to solve huge problems without the support, direction, or mentorship they need. It leads to stress, anxiety, and even feelings of isolation. We've been that leader feeling out in a limb with no help, and we wish that on no one. Because of this, Aaron and I are offering focused short-term coaching for the challenges you are facing. We'll spend time with you every week to help you understand and overcome what's in your way. If you've got problems and want help from coaches who have spent real time leading game development, check out the show notes or head to buildingbettergames.gg and click coaching. Thanks. Let's get back into it.
Well, but it's again, it comes back down to that central point. It's like all of those things you just said are unsatisfying. I don't want to hear it depends. I want to hear an answer. And so when we talk about leaders and what leaders need to do to be better, one of the things leaders need to do to be better is figure out how to live in a world where there aren't clear answers to these conversations and build the skills for yourself to start, but also within your team to figure it out. Like your job is to figure it out. Your job is not to know. Your job is not to be able to say, you need 50 people and $3 million. Because that's not true. It's a lie. It's a lie that we tell ourselves so that we can feel confident and comfortable and secure. And that's the point. And this is the shift that leadership needs to make, and leadership needs to make it fast, because I think we're very close. And by the way, I know that this is controversial. I know that a lot of AAA game developers hear me say this and they don't agree. But I have to ask the question, do you think you're a better game developer than the guy who made Stardew Valley? Like, surely you feel good about your experience. Surely you feel good about all the projects you've worked on. Surely you've had some great successes. But are you a better game developer than the guy who made PUBG? Because I'm not asking you to compare yourself to somebody else. I'm asking you a pointed question to help you understand how prepared you are for the future. Because we could wake up in a world 3 years from now where this debate that I have with studios when we go to consult with them, where I'm like, hey, you need to build a more collaborative team to do this right. And they're like, I don't know, we like this approach and we like this. And I'm like, none of it matters if the kids in their dorm room at college start producing games that are more successful than the ones we can make. Like, that debate ends very quickly. And so we all need to take a step back and ask ourselves, are we equipped to deal with this new world? Like, are we ready to make the right decisions for us and our people? Because right now, I'll be honest, I see an industry that is more immature than a lot of other industries who are working in less innovative spaces than we are. And it's very disappointing. And I don't say that to be like a Debbie Downer or be negative or anything like that. I say that because that's just what I see. I don't see a group of people that's like actually super open to learning. And we're supposed to be the tip of the spear. We're supposed to be the innovators. We're supposed to be the creatives. We're supposed to be the ones that are iconoclasts that break the trends. Like, what the hell happened to us? Why are we using these draconian management methods? Why are our people so upset and feel burned out and disenfranchised all the time? Why are we always a slave to the next check, to the money, to the VCs, to the publishers? Why are we making decisions we know are wrong because somebody else is pressuring us to? We're so afraid. We're so caged. Like, I don't get it. Like, and it's not to say that I don't understand when you have a family to support and you have bills to pay, why that security matters. But we're quickly getting to a place where if we don't figure this out and we don't find a way to be better, we're going to lose to people who have no money and no resources. And then we're going to all be out of jobs.
And so I love everything you just said, because I think it speaks to, we've always, this idea of like us in game dev, we've been the best at making games. And you're pointing out that, like, have we? One, right? Because look at the mods that have come out and how successful some of them have been. Admittedly, millions of failures, but man, some amazing successes. And two, what if that's the future? What role are you going to play in that? How are you going to be valuable in this world? And I think I'm going to segue this into the last thing I wanted to talk about when it came to like broad trends. And it's another controversial one, and it's AI. We did a podcast on it a while ago. An interesting thing is like AI, let's not talk about whether it's actually artificial intelligence and all the different blah, blah, blah. AI broadly is a way to create content much more rapidly, or code much more rapidly than you could before. Whether it's any good or not is up for debate. Whether that's moral or not, it's ethical to do that or not, is up for debate. I know people that even thinking about using AI makes them think less of you, as an example. And I know other people that are embracing it as a force multiplier as they do their work. And something that like, I don't have to spend as much time doing the busy work of whatever my role was, be that coding, art, whatever. And they're just like, cool, I can help you. This can help me work faster. And that shift is both what's going to make the UGC world insane, because now the role of the human is no longer in the development necessarily of every piece of content that goes out, but more the selection of every piece of content that goes out. And I can get AI to do a lot of the rest for me. Again, whether you find that moral or not, irrelevant. Same thing with code. I don't need to be a great engineer. I'll get the AI to code it for me, and I just need to learn enough to kind of troubleshoot and largely get this to work okay. And so my idea is much closer to reality as an idea. All these things are going to enable the UGC market to just grow and expand like crazy in games. And I think it's also a mechanism for AAA to fight back against that, because suddenly maybe AI can help you not have to spend so much money on a AAA game that you have a lower and lower likelihood is going to return that investment, because maybe you can do more with less. Or and this is the thing, I think a lot of people are like, everybody's gonna get fired because AI showed up. And I don't think that's what the layoffs are right now. No. What I do think is most of the big game companies,
the truth is AI can't replace what most of those people do. Like you said, it's the combination. I think I like the way you said it. It's the combination of the rapid creation of content and the discernment on top of it that comes together to add value. Because neither the discernment by itself is not valuable. I mean, it's helpful, but it's not valuable in so far as creating a full product. And the content spam is also not valuable. I mean, you and I have seen this. We cannot replace our LinkedIn posts with AI. We cannot replace our newsletters with AI. Some people do it and it's bad. We're going to beat them because our stuff is good and their stuff is bad. Like, as far as I can tell, AI cannot create like rich content that's engaging on the level of like what humans expect at the standard of quality these days. However, what AI can do is create 10,000 things that a human can look at and be like, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that, I don't want this, I don't want this. Remake that, I want that. And that flow can increase the throughput.
And this is where, for me,
so then it's like discernment becomes the key thing there, right?
Right. Because, and again, everybody's worried about like everybody's gonna get fired because of AI. Well, I don't doubt that there's gonna be some of that. It probably already has been. The reality, though, is that we were already bottlenecked as a broad game development industry in the AAA space on content creation. It was so hard to create enough content, to build enough levels, to build enough weapons or skins or whatever it was. That was where we were struggling in many places. It wasn't like I could make it AAA studios or smaller studios. They were making successful games, but the players were playing those games, running out of content and moving on. And what if there was a way for you to keep making even more content that those players love? I think AI is going to play a role in accelerating that. And so but again, it's open access, right? The mod, like the kid in his dorm room can do that just as well as the AAA studio. And so this is one of the changes that's going to happen. That's going to lead to there being so many more mods, so many more games produced. Like we've just seen that number go up and up and up and up and up. And again, relatively fewer hits, but those hits are going to knock it out of the park when they do. And they're not necessarily going to be AAA, because that's the thing that's been fascinating about the last few years. Some of these small games made by just a couple of people actually look like something that a major studio would produce. when, you know, if you squint a little bit, it's like, this is actually really, really cool. This is a really impressive game. Whoa, this is, I'm going to play this for a long time. And it's like, wait a minute, like 5 people did this?
Yeah.
Or even like 40 people did this? Because for AAA to even try this would take 200.
Yep. And again, when we think about discernment, it's like I'm out here and I make a LinkedIn post saying, hey, great game developers play games. And a lot of people get upset by that. And I'm like, that's a great example of how you build discernment. Like if you haven't played a game that's not Candy Crush in the last 10 years, how the hell are you going to have discernment? You know what I mean? Like your job is either to, again, maintain the assembly line, run a big organization, or repeat the success of a previous product. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. I know it might sound like judgment. I don't mean it to sound like judgment. I'm not judging those organizations. Those organizations make hundreds of millions of dollars and make a lot of people secure and gainfully employed and players happy. What we're trying to illuminate is what's coming up in the future. And we're trying to like really kind of pull back the layers of the onion to get to the pieces that are actually the pieces that create value. And again, we are already living. This isn't like, 10 years from now, people might start making hit games in their basement with 2 people. It's already happening. A lot of the AAA games you're playing today are derivatives of those games that have already been created. The trend has already begun and it's accelerating. And so again, when we bring this back to leadership as one of these key elements of this conversation, I want to ask you leaders, what are you doing to prepare yourself for that world? How are you honing the value that you offer to your teams? Like if I ripped you out of your AAA studio or I ripped you out of your company and I threw you onto that new team of 5 college kids
5-person
making one of those hit games, could you help them? Like, do you know how to run a team like that? Like, could you guide them in a way that was actually going to help them make that game as great as it could be? Because if the answer is no, or you're not sure, that's something you should think about, because that's really, really important, because that could be all of our jobs 5 years from now.
One other thing I want to kick out there, if you're out there and you're doing hiring and you're thinking about leaders in game dev, that product manager who focuses on monetization primarily and thinks about that, like again, maybe grew up in a mobile environment and is very focused on user acquisition, advertising, player spend, that sort of thing. That's a great leader in their space. They can do amazing things. Is that the space that you want? If it is, great, hire that person. If it's not the space you're in, be careful. Don't buy a brand name. Just because someone's LinkedIn profile says Zynga or Supercell or Blizzard or Riot, like for me, it doesn't mean that they're actually going to be able to flex into what you need. Make sure you talk to them and understand the type of leader you're bringing in, because somebody who's phenomenal at making, NHL 24 a successful game may not be the same person to, as Aaron was pointing out, go help Valheim figure out how to really unlock new markets. Like these are 2 different skill sets. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't hire that person. I'm saying you should talk to them first and make sure that they're willing to make that jump and that fundamentally they're willing to learn and figure out how to lead differently and better. Because if they're just like, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, someone who is focused heavily on monetization and user acquisition and that stuff, if they're going to show up to your game and just bring a lot of monetization and user acquisition and that's not what you need, the fact that they were a senior producer at a very reputable place doesn't mean they're going to be helpful to you. In fact, they may derail what you're doing. And this is something else Aaron and I have seen in companies we've interacted with, where they start scaling and then they bring in people who know how to do this sort of repeatable process of making the next sequel, of making the next sequel, of making the next sequel. But they're not trying to make the next sequel.
They make the assembly line that dumps features into the ocean. And they come into your studio and they set that up because why? Well, it worked for them, but it's actually not going to work for you with what you're trying to do. So all of these different leaders have value in their space. Make sure if you hire across spaces that person is able to learn and pick up and is willing to operate differently than they have before. Because if they're not, they're going to stumble and your studio will stumble with them. I want to talk quickly about the morale implications of some of this as well, because morale is super low in our industry right now, I think across the board, which is a real shame, because I think for so many of us, we got into this industry because of how passionate we felt growing up and early on in life about these kinds of products and about the value they could have for gamers around the world. And I've never heard so many people in pain. I've never seen so many people laid off. I've never seen so many people cynical about the players that they serve. I've never seen so many people feeling like they got lied to about what this industry was going to be. I mean, there's investment bankers on Wall Street that are making, millions of dollars a year, or people coming from enterprise tech with $350K salaries that move over to take a $60,000 position or a $40,000 position in QA because they're so passionate. And it reminds me of the podcast we did with Josiah from Sprocket, where he talked about this idea of the myth of the dream job and how we sell that to people in this industry. And then the horrific reality comes pouring in about what life is actually like, which is that you get paid next to nothing. You work your ass off. You deliver subpar products under draconian management to players who are unsatisfied with everything you do. And again, I'm being hyperbolic to illustrate the feelings that I hear a lot of people expressing. And then on top of that, you get laid off at the first sign of danger, right? Really great recipe for career happiness and life happiness. And I just think that that's bullshit, and we should be better than that. And I think we should aspire for more than that. And I think back to the trends we were talking about, those trends require us to solve that problem as well. Like those techniques, the reason we arrange things so that we get those outcomes are not serving us anyway. So we might as well change them. We talk about, the three things: autonomy, mastery, purpose are the three things that create job satisfaction or career satisfaction for people in general. Autonomy, mastery, purpose. We are the perfect industry to offer all three of those things to people, yet we don't. How is that the case? So this is another call out to leaders. It's like people are hurting right now, and we can do better than that. Like this isn't an assembly line with disposable robots that we can just throw away, and we can just put each one in their appropriate robot slot and have them do the work and make the things get done. Like, it's more to it than that. Hire the passionate junior developers that have played the games in the genre you're building that are going to collaborate. Give them agency. Trust your people to actually make a damn decision. Knock it off with this like hierarchical nonsense. It's not working anymore. Like, and honestly, even when it does work, like even when you manage to scrape a product over the finish line, your people aren't happy. They would love to go work at another company. They just don't think that they can. Like, is that what you want? This is one of those things where I get that it's hard. I get that there is an economic squeeze happening on us right now, but I don't feel like we can make excuses for having low morale in this industry. The games industry should be the best place to work in the entire world. And right now I feel like if it is, it's because of the passion of the people doing the work, not because of the studios setting them up for success. And that's unacceptable to me.
I really appreciate everything you just said, and it resonates with me. It makes a ton of sense to me. And I hope the people out there listening are also paying attention, are also willing to look themselves in the mirror at whatever layer they are and go, am I the leader for the future of game development, or am I the leader for the past of game development? And I think with that, we'll wrap this one up. Thank you all so much for listening. And until next time.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, every 2 weeks, we're going to be delivering an actionable step that will increase your chances of delivering a successful game straight to your inbox. Join game developers across the world and sign up for the Building Better Games newsletter at www.buildingbettergames.gg /newsletter.
Over the last few years, producers have been asking Aaron and I, what's my role? What are the skills I should develop? How do I advance in my career? Game production is in a rough state. We've launched a course to help. It's called Succeeding in Game Production, What You Aren't Taught. Early feedback from our beta tester and early access audience has been overwhelmingly positive, so we're looking to help even more producers. If that's of interest, check it out in the show notes or head to buildingbettergames.gg and click course. Thanks. Appreciate you listening.